College basketball is officially back, and Gonzaga is already facing a major test on night one. What needs to happen for the Zags to start the season 1-0?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Monday, happy opening day, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you another season of Gonzaga basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, place your first $5 bet and you will get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win. Just visit FanDuel.com today to get started. Well, Gonzaga versus Baylor is the game of the day all across college basketball. We're going to get you everything you need to know about this matchup. We're going to meet the Bears, new look roster, Scott Drew, Mark Few, all of the angles for this game. We're also going to talk about the 5 things Gonzaga needs to do to ensure a victory and that they start the season with a 1-0 record. And then we're going to close out the show with a couple of mailbag questions, question about Gonzaga's 3-point shooting specialists for this roster, and some conversation about Grand Canyon officially deciding not to join the WCC after all and instead going to the Mountain West, why they did that, what it means for them. But obviously the big storyline, college basketball officially back. First games of the day, the first D1 matchup of the day is at 9 a.m. Pacific time. Charleston versus Southern Illinois is the matchup there. Santa Clara plays a fantastic game against St. Louis. That should be a really fun one. But the best game of the day, and the game most of you all care about the most, of course, is Gonzaga taking on Baylor. The game is at 8:30 p.m. Pacific time, and it will be at the Spokane Arena. Gonzaga's 13-6 all-time at the Spokane Arena, 11-4 in the Mark Few era. The game is going to be on ESPN2 following the Manning cast of the Monday Night Football game between the Chiefs and Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This is basically how it was always going to go. Once we found out Gonzaga and Baylor were playing on the first day of the season, we knew ESPN had first rights of refusal. We also knew ESPN was never, ever going to give up a chance to have Gonzaga and Baylor on their TV screens. So we figured they would find a way to make it work after Monday Night Football. And of course, that is the reality. So there's going to be a late tip, 10:30 East or 10:30 local time for the fans in Waco, 8:30 for those of us out on the West Coast. Part of a 3-game series between Gonzaga and Baylor. Since this game is in Spokane, a mile from Gonzaga's campus, I suspect one of the next 2 games will be in Waco or somewhere in Texas, Dallas maybe. And then that third game will be more of an actual neutral site game, whether they actually make it work in Mexico City, which was reported as a rumor this offseason, whether they play it in Las Vegas, whether they go back to the Sanford Pentagon, everybody's favorite in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, who knows? But that would be my prediction for these next 2 games. Gonzaga has a 5-2 all-time advantage against Baylor, but Baylor won the one that matters the most, the national championship game in 2021. They won the most recent one as well. Gonzaga was 5-0 against Baylor before losing that championship game and then losing last year against Baylor as well. So let's talk about this Baylor team. We got some KenPom, AP, Torvik, but again, all that data doesn't matter as much when we haven't actually seen a game of basketball played. KenPom has Baylor 11th and Gonzaga 9th. They have Baylor 7th in adjusted offensive efficiency, 23rd defensively, and 285th in tempo. But again, that is with only data points from these the players who are currently on the roster, who were there last year, and then, of course, some data from those transfers as well. But we'll see what that looks like when games have been played. Torvik has Baylor 15th and Gonzaga 8th. The AP poll has Baylor 8th, Gonzaga 6th. The coaches poll has Baylor 7th and Gonzaga 8th. All that to say, these 2 teams are really close to each other in the polls, in the computer metrics, in the human polls, all that have this as a matchup between 2 top 10 teams pretty much everywhere. So certainly, there's a reason that this is the exciting matchup of the day for college basketball. Baylor went 24-11 last year, 11-7 in the Big 12. That was good for 3rd place in a conference where everybody beat each other up all year long. They earned a 3 seed in the NCAA tournament, lost to a 6 seed in Clemson before getting a chance to advance further. We've seen Baylor struggle a little bit in the tournament the last couple of years since, of course, winning that national championship in 2021. And this is a pretty new look Baylor roster. They keep a few key pieces. Jaden Nunn, Langston Love come back. Josh Ojianwuna comes back as well in the front court, but they lost a ton of talent. Jacoby Walker, Jalen Bridges, Yves Missy, all out the door to the NBA. Ray J. Dennis is gone. Caleb Lohner and Miro Little are gone. Jonathan Chachama-Chachua is out the door as well, but they made some big-time additions. And honestly, this offseason feels very similar for Baylor to what Gonzaga's offseason looked like prior to last season. Let me explain. Last offseason, Gonzaga had to replace their starting point guard and their starting center in the transfer portal, and they added veteran, talented players to those key positions of need via the portal. Of course, Graham Ike at the center position from Wyoming, and then Ryan Nembhard at the point guard position from Creighton. Baylor did the same thing. They add Jeremy Roach from Duke. They add Norchad Omier from Miami. Now, these players are very different from Graham Ike and Ryan Nembhard. Jeremy Roach is more of a score-first guard. He's never averaged more, I think, barely over 3 assists per game, whereas Ryan Nembhard was about 7 assists per game last year, but Roach is a 43% three-point shooter. Nembhard was not a 43% three-point shooter. Omier is a lower usage big. He's not somebody who demands the ball on the block. Baylor's very unlikely to run their offense through low post touches to Omier the way Gonzaga does with Ike, but Omier is a tenacious rebounder. He has averaged a double-double every season of his college basketball career. 2 of those seasons were at Arkansas State, so maybe you think, okay, averaging a double-double at a mid-major school, fine, but he also did it twice at Miami in the ACC. And to average a double-double for 4 years, I don't really care where you played. That's ridiculous. Gonzaga's had very few players average a double-double in a full season. Graham Ike's best season was not a double-double, 19.6 and 9.6 for rebounds for him at Wyoming. It's really hard to average a double-double. Omier is a ferocious rebounder, a very good offensive rebounder, not a super similar player to Graham Ike. But the similarities of adding a veteran point guard and a veteran center in the transfer portal in the same offseason, that mirrors what Gonzaga did last year. Both these teams also added a key three-point shooting specialist. Gonzaga, of course, was Steele Venters, who did not suit up last year and who unfortunately will not suit up this year as well. For Baylor, they added Jalen Celestine from Cal. Celestine shot about 44% from 3 last year for the Golden Bears. So that is the role that he is going to fill for this Baylor team. And both Gonzaga and Baylor are started true freshmen at small forward last season. Or Gonzaga did it last season. Baylor's going to this season to mirror these similarities. You all know I love Dusty Stromer. This is not a knock on him, but that's a very significant difference between Dusty Stromer, who was thrust into a starting role because of the Steele Venters injury, compared to VJ Edgecombe, widely considered a top 5, maybe top 3 pick in the 2025 NBA draft. A 19-year-old, played for the Bahamas national team in the Olympics. He is a tremendous athlete, downhill scorer, dunking machine. We'll see how raw he looks, but he's older for a freshman. Again, the comparison is not that similar between Stromer and Edgecombe, but the fact that Baylor replaced 2 starters at center and point guard, have a freshman starting at small forward, and added a key three-point specialist really does mirror what Gonzaga's offseason looked like last year. And I say all that to point out that Gonzaga kind of struggled early in the season last year. Coached by one of the very best in the business, one of the few coaches that is at the level of Scott Drew in terms of just general coaching prowess, and yet Gonzaga still struggled to make those adjustments. Players like Nembhard and Ike took some time to find each other, to figure out their roles, and it wasn't just that. Nolan Hickman was adjusting to playing more off the ball. Anton Watson was adjusting to taking on a bigger load offensively. Obviously, Stromer thrust into that role, Ben Gregg into a different role. There was a lot of changes, and we're going to see a lot of that at Baylor too. Starting center is different in Omier, starting point guard's different in Roach, new player in VJ Edgecombe. Jaden Nunn's probably playing a fairly similar role as their 2 guard. Langston Love, we'll see what role he fills coming off the bench, but this is going to be a team that takes some time to find those roles, to find what they're asked to do. And Scott Drew is challenging them right away, not just by playing against Gonzaga in Spokane at the arena, but they're playing Arkansas later this week. 2 top 16 teams in the AP poll against Baylor in week 1. Scott Drew wants his team ready. He is doing a trial by fire situation, and this is going to be a really good team for Gonzaga to face early in the year. And they're in different places, with Gonzaga returning 7 of their 8 key rotation pieces from last year, and Baylor not in that same position. It's easy to point to, Gonzaga's playing much closer to home. They have that home court advantage. They have more returners. It's early in the season. And yeah, I think all of that plays a significant factor in Gonzaga being favored in this game at FanDuel and being generally favored among college basketball spaces. But this Baylor team is going to be really good. And there's a lot of key things that Gonzaga is going to need to do to make sure they walk out of the arena back to campus with a 1-0 record on the season. We're going to talk about what those things are, why Khalif Battle is such a big part of it, coming up here in just a second. But first, our friends over at 5 Hour Energy, they know that being a passionate fan is not just a hobby, it's a way of life. And it takes a lot of energy to power through all-day pregame parties, post-game celebrations, or 8:30 p.m. starts like Gonzaga Baylor tonight. That's why they've created the Stan the Fan 5 Hour Energy Shot with a special flavor called Fan Fuel, the energy shot made just for super fans like us. The fans who are the first in the kennel, the fans who are the last to leave, we see you, and we know that that's what's given us Zag fans fuel this week, this opening night matchup against Baylor. Again, an 8:30 start. For those of you out on the East Coast, 11:30 p.m. start. You guys are going to need a 5 Hour Energy, and they know that no matter what team you root for, being a fan requires heart, soul, and in this case, a whole lot of energy. So whether you're prepping for the big tailgate, ironing your jersey, your game day to-do list is always a mile long. And that's why the limited edition Stan the Fan 5 Hour Energy Shot is here to help keep you fueled throughout the season. What's your fan fuel this week? Whatever it is, do it with the 5 Hour Energy. Available on the 5hourenergy.com site, shipping nationwide. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we're still getting you ready for the big game tonight. Gonzaga, Baylor, 8:30 p.m., Spokane Arena. The game will be on ESPN2. And for those of you who are longtime listeners to the show, everyday listeners, I appreciate you. Thank you so much. Those of you who are new to the show, one of the things we like to do pregame is to give either a 5 things to watch or a 5 keys to victory. It sort of depends on the opponent. We're not really going to do a 5 keys to victory when Gonzaga plays Pacific or San Diego, but in certain matchups, we want to focus not just on here's what I'm going to be looking for, but here's specifically what we think Gonzaga needs to do in order to come away with a victory. And against a top 10 team, top 5 in some places in Baylor, that is the key here. What does Gonzaga need to do to make sure they're getting a W? Number 1, get Baylor's front court in foul trouble. If there is a weakness on Baylor's roster, it is depth in the front court. It is a significant area of concern for Baylor at this point in the season. They have 2 key players in that front court, Josh Ojianwuna and Norchad Omier. I'm not exactly sure what their starting lineup is going to look like. I kind of mentioned Omier as the 5, kind of doing the comparison with Ike, but it's possible that Baylor starts Omier at the 4 and starts Ojianwuna, who averaged about 5 and 3 last year in a reserve role, at the 5. He's 6'10", Omier's 6'7", but don't let Omier's size fool you. Again, he's a guy who averaged 10-plus rebounds per game each of the last 4 years. But outside of that, there's not a lot of front court depth on this team. They're going to have to go really small if either of those players are in foul trouble. Ojianwuna averaged about 6 fouls per 40 minutes last year. Omier was a little less than that, about 5.5. So neither of them are big foul merchants. Neither of them are guys who commit a lot of fouls, who struggle in that area the way that, frankly, Gonzaga has had players who struggle in the past and really recently with Graham Ike. That's an area that we've seen him struggle in his first season in Spokane. But we also haven't seen Gonzaga have a player like Khalif Battle. And Khalif Battle's ability to draw contact, to get to the free throw line, is one of the biggest developments on this roster coming into the season. And Gonzaga needs it right away. They need it in game 1, because if Khalif Battle can get downhill, can get to the rim, can get either Omier or Ojianwuna to commit fouls on him, that tests their depth really early. I mean, outside of those 2 guys, they have their 3rd-ranked freshman in their 3-man class, Jason Asamoto, who's a barely top 75 prospect. He's listed as a small forward, but he's 6'8". He's like the next biggest guy on their roster. When Isaac and I were doing our Baylor team preview for Locked On College Basketball, we were kind of wondering if Langston Love, who's listed as a shooting guard, who's 6'6", he might play the 4 in certain lineups for this team. Same with the transfer from Cal, Jalen Celestine, who's a 6'6" wing, but they don't have a lot of other options. I think they're going to be playing pretty small this year. And that doesn't necessarily mean that, Gonzaga will just, bully them on the board, particularly not if Omier's in the game. But if you can get those bigs in foul trouble, test that front court depth early in this game, that is a massive potential advantage Gonzaga could have going forward in this contest. Key number 2, this is going to be a key throughout the year in a lot of ways, and I think Gonzaga's continuity is going to help in this area. Dictate the pace. I said it in the open there. Baylor's projected pace this year at KenPom is 285th. We don't know exactly what pace Baylor's going to run because this is a brand new roster with new guards in the backcourt. It's going to look a little different, but Baylor traditionally doesn't like to push that much. Now, VJ Edgecombe in particular is an absolute terror in the fast break. If he gets out in transition, he is gone like a freight train. You are never going to want to try to stop him. So I wonder if that pushes Baylor to try to run a little bit more. But ultimately, my guess is that Baylor's going to try to play a little bit slower. They're going to try to determine their pace the way that Randy Bennett and St. Mary's typically do, the way that UConn has done to Gonzaga in the past. Many other teams have done this, some successfully, some not so successfully. But for Gonzaga, in a pseudo-home environment with a roster that has played a lot of minutes together, they should be dictating the pace. And the pace they should be dictating is fast. Push Baylor outside of their comfort zone from a pace perspective. Make them get up and down the floor with you. Make those bigs get up and down the floor. If you can't get them in foul trouble, wear them out. That's the next best thing you can do. Tire those dudes out. Get up and down the floor. You have the depth to do it this year. You didn't really have the depth to do it last year. They tried and they struggled. They tried and failed against Washington because they were gassed at the end of that game. They tried and failed against other teams they lost to because they couldn't do it because they didn't have enough options, particularly in the backcourt. That is not the case this year. Dusty Stromer is more prepared to play a bigger role, can play some two. Khalif Battle, obviously huge, impactful player to add in that backcourt, not just because of his talent, but because they have somebody who can play 30 minutes a night who is not Brian Nembhard and Nolan Hickman. This depth in the backcourt allows Gonzaga to get out and go and run, and the familiarity with Ryan Nembhard and the rest of his teammates should allow this team to set the pace, get up and down the floor, and wear Baylor out. And then it's a lot easier to get guys to foul you if they're a little tired. Wear them out, get to the free throw line, put them in foul trouble, put them on the bench, wear out the backups, and win this basketball game. Key number 3, it's a key in every game, but it's worth mentioning for this one. Shoot well from beyond the arc. You got to knock down your threes. You got to knock down your threes at the Spokane Arena. You got to knock them down against a good Baylor team that's projected top 5 offensively, top 25 defensively. It's going to be important in this one because Baylor can put up points in a hurry. They have really good three-point shooters. We mentioned Celestine, the transfer from Cal. Jeremy Roach is a fantastic three-point shooter. We'll see how much of a shooter Edgecombe is right away, but this is a team that can really shoot it. And Gonzaga, Nolan Hickman's back. He led the team in three-pointers made last year by a significant margin. He was over 40% on the season. You bring in Michael Ajayi, he was 47% last year. They're going to need to space the floor. You need the bigs to space the floor. If you can pull Ojianwuna and or Norchad Omier away from the rim because they have to defend Ben Gregg or Braden Huff, at the three-point line, that gives Khalif Battle more room to operate, more room to drive downhill. Same with pick and rolls. You can do pick and pops with those guys, get those bigs away from the rim. Floor spacing, three-point shooting going to be vital this season, as it always is, and especially against a team as good as Baylor. Key number 4, you got to limit the second chance opportunities. Through his career, Norchad Omier has averaged 3.7 offensive rebounds per game. That is massive. He led his conference in offensive rebounds twice in his 4-year career, once in the Sun Belt, once in the ACC. He is a really, really good rebounder, and he's really good at getting second chance opportunities. Graham Ike is a good rebounder, but he is not a great rebounder. He is going to need to be a great rebounder in this game. Otherwise, Omier is going to crush them. Playing good defense and getting a miss from Baylor is going to be difficult as it is. Giving them a second chance opportunity is a quick way to ensure you lose this basketball game. I mentioned Ike, but Michael Ajayi is going to be critical in this area as well. Mark Few said he's perhaps the best rebounder they've ever had. In the exhibition game so far, we've seen Ajayi flying in for rebounds. He is tenacious. He's physical. He has a nose for the basketball. In this game in particular, he is going to need to go sniff that basketball off the rim and prevent Omier and others from getting those offensive boards and those second chance opportunities for the Bears. Key number 5, don't let early season jitters become a problem. Easier said than done, right? You're playing in a home environment, but not at your home arena. It's not a place that these Zags are very comfortable. The veterans have played there a few times, and some of the younger guys have played there very few times. It's going to be a pro-Zag crowd, but you know you're playing a good team. Do not let that get in your head. That is the biggest thing. If this game was in December, I think people would feel differently about it. But the possibility of starting the season 0-1, I think is it impacts people. I feel it. Many of you feel it. And I think rational fans, again, including many of you, know that losing this game now versus losing this game in December doesn't really change anything. But going the next 5 days, knowing that Gonzaga hasn't won a single game in the season is just kind of a hard thing to take. And I don't want these players to feel that. At the same time, don't get complacent. Don't feel like, oh, well, we've played a bunch of minutes together and that team hasn't at all, so we're going to win. Like, you don't want complacency. And Mark Few will never let his team get complacent. That is just not an issue that this team has really dealt with. But avoid those like early season panic about how good of a team they're playing on the first day of the season. And I think that's a key way to ensure that this isn't a game that gets dropped for Gonzaga. We're going to move on. We're going to talk about a couple of mailbag questions that came in, including about Gonzaga's leading three-point shooter this season and what to make of Grand Canyon leaving the WCC before they even got started. We're going to talk about those two topics coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, get ready to tackle the college hoops action this season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app also gives you everything that you need to place live bets all in one place. When you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. We just laid out everything there is to know about Gonzaga Baylor, so if you head to FanDuel, you will see the Zags are favored by 3.5 points. I like it. I like this being a close game, but I also like Gonzaga knocking down 6 or 7 free throws in the final 2 minutes of this game and winning it by 7 or 8 points. If you agree with me, you feel like Gonzaga is going to cover that spread, visit FanDuel.com. You bet $5, you win that bet, you get $150 in bonus bets. That is FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. And we are moving away from previewing the Gonzaga Baylor game to talk about a pair of mailbag questions that we got here. We're probably not going to do as much mailbag during the season. Gonzaga so frequently plays on either Saturday or Sunday or Friday, frankly, that we're always going to have games that we want to recap or even games we want to preview early in the week. So we'll try to get to mailbag when we can. If you ask questions and you don't get them answered right away, I apologize. It's just not going to be something we get to as often this year. But had a couple that I wanted to get to before the game started. This one comes from White Chocolate on Discord, who says, third year for this question. 2 years ago, you were 2 for 2, and last year doesn't count due to Steele Venters' injury. Who leads the Zags in total three-pointers made and three-point percentage? This year might be the hardest since I've asked it. Well, I'm glad I'm 2 for 2 on getting that right 2 years ago, and I'm glad it doesn't get held against me, the Steele Venters injury, but I'm not sure that this is that hard. I think it's difficult to guess the three-point percentage, but that's always kind of difficult because it's a bit of a crapshoot. But in terms of total three-pointers, it's going to be Nolan Hickman. I feel pretty confident about this for a fairly obvious reason. Nolan Hickman made 78 three-pointers last year. The next highest total who was on Gonzaga's roster last year was Ben Gregg, who made 40. So Nolan Hickman was 2 three-pointers away from doubling up on Ben Gregg in terms of total three-pointers made. And the roster is mostly the same. The expectation is that most players are filling the same roles that they filled last year. So expecting that any of the other players to challenge Hickman at the top seems pretty unlikely. What about the newcomers? Khalif Battle made 48 threes last year in Arkansas's offense. Michael Ajayi, who was a phenomenal, efficient three-point shooter, we'll talk about that in a second, he made 39. So Nolan Hickman doubled up on Michael Ajayi's total three-pointers made and had 30 more made threes than Khalif Battle. I don't expect Khalif Battle to be a gunning three-pointer. I think he's going to be a rim pressure specialist. I do think Ajayi is going to be a very efficient and effective three-point shooter, but I'd be very surprised if he got anywhere near Hickman's total number of three-pointers made. Three-point percentage, however, like we said, a little bit tougher. At Pepperdine last year, Ajayi shot 47%. That would be the best among anybody on Gonzaga's roster. Anton Watson and Nolan Hickman were very similar last year in their percentage, but Ajayi better than both of them. But again, Ajayi took 83 three-pointers last year. Hickman made 78 of them. So the volume is just very different. I expect Ajayi to have a somewhat similar role here that he did as a three-point shooter at Pepperdine. Not his overall role. He's not going to average 17 points a game, I don't think. I would be surprised if he was in that range. He's not going to get as many shot attempts because he's in an offense that has better offensive players that funnels the ball through the paint in Graham Ike. But I think that what we're going to see is that Ajayi is going to get even more open looks from three than he got during his time at Pepperdine, because there's going to be double teams on Graham Ike. They're going to swing the ball around. This is just a more efficient offense. And I think it's going to result in Ajayi not being a huge high volume shooter, which he wasn't at Pepperdine, but getting tons of open looks. So I frankly wouldn't be surprised if he's in that range again, 47, 45 plus, somewhere between 45 and 50. Hickman, I don't see a dramatic change, which would result in Ajayi being the leader in three-point percentage. So that's the prediction I'm going to go with. Hickman leads in total three-pointers made. Ajayi leads in three-point percentage on this roster. Final question of the show comes from Bogmeyer34 on Discord, who says, what do you think of Grand Canyon withdrawing from the WCC? Is the Mountain West that much better with all their departures? I know Gonzaga leaving sucks for Grand Canyon, but it would still be a top mid-major conference. Yeah, frankly, the Mountain West with all their departures is still better than the WCC sans Gonzaga. There's not a super compelling argument otherwise. The Mountain West still retains Nevada, New Mexico, and UNLV. Both Nevada and New Mexico went to the NCAA tournament last year, and they're fairly consistent stalwarts in being in the tournament. Neither of them are pushing for top 5 seeds and making deep runs in March, anything like that. But they are consistently top 30 net teams, consistently playing good teams in the non-conference, consistently doing enough work in the conference slate to end the season where they're getting at-large bids into the big dance. UNLV did not make it last year, and their basketball history recently has been a little bit spotty, but they were a 20-win team last year. They're trending in the right direction. They're in a huge media market in Vegas. There's an expectation that UNLV is going to continue to grow as a men's basketball program. Those 3 programs is a better top 3 for a school like Grand Canyon than St. Mary's, Santa Clara, and San Francisco, which is going to be your top 3 in the WCC sans Gonzaga. Santa Clara and San Francisco continue to be in that periphery conversation as being NCAA tournament caliber programs, but outside of one run by San Francisco, in 2021, those 2 teams haven't made it. And now they're both going to be tasked with trying to make it as an at-large bid against St. Mary's when they don't have 2 or 3 matchups against Gonzaga to pad their quad 1 resume. I don't see a reality where those 2 teams are even as consistently contending for at-large bids in the NCAA tournament as they have been in the past. So comparing that to a conference that is getting, even with Boise State and San Diego State and Colorado State and Utah State all leaving, is still a conference that's getting multiple bids into the league. So this is a better conference for Grand Canyon, unfortunately, in huge part because of the departure of Gonzaga, of course. It sounds like they're getting more money from the Mountain West. So it's more money. It's a better basketball conference. I understand the decision. It sucks for the WCC. This is a huge bummer. They were proactive. They went out and out of these schools knowing that Gonzaga might leave, trying to predict what would happen and keep their conference in a stable spot. And it still didn't really work. They still lost Gonzaga as they kind of thought they would, but then their insurance plan in Grand Canyon bounces. And now there's rumors about St. Mary's. We'll see if anything actually happens with Randy Bennett's program and St. Mary's, which is a very small school and doesn't have a lot of resources and may be viewed negatively because of that. But right now, the WCC is shaping up to be a one bid league with St. Mary's, one of the better one bid leagues in all of college basketball, but it's understandable that Grand Canyon would rather compete with New Mexico and Nevada and UNLV and the other schools in the Mountain West than with this WCC sans Gonzaga. It's going to wrap it up for me today, folks. Cannot wait for the next episodes when we're going to have real basketball games to discuss. I'm going to be going live on the Locked On College Basketball podcast directly after the Gonzaga Baylor game. So check that out. If you haven't subscribed to that show, you haven't started listening to that show, now is the perfect time to do so. We'll be live recapping that game, recapping all the rest of the news around college basketball. And then, of course, I'll have a Locked On Zags special episode for y'all after that as well. I got a really fun guest lined up for you on Wednesday's show. I cannot wait for you to hear that show. That one's going to be incredible. And then we're going to get you ready for Gonzaga taking on Arizona State next weekend, and then right into the rest of the season, San Diego State shortly after that. And then you got the battle for Atlantis, everything coming up after that. Going to be so much fun to have real basketball to talk about here soon. Thank you so much for those of you who have made the show your first listen, your first watch of the day. Subscribe to the Locked On Zags Discord channel if you have not done so yet. We're going to be doing game chats throughout the game. So if you want to come chat with us during Gonzaga Baylor, we're going to be talking about what we're seeing, all sorts of fun stuff there. Come hang out. The link to join the Zags Discord channel is in your show notes. Thanks again, folks. And as always, especially today on opening day, go Zags.